Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to be introducing Maven today. Before we get started, I'm actually curious if anyone in the audience is already a Maven user. Any at all? Oh, perfect. Okay. So now I can feed you false information and you won't know. Okay, I'm going to do this kind of by example. It's really informal. But I think Maven kind of came about just as a necessity. Makefiles are great. I'm a make user myself for most things, but Java projects is one area where I don't go that route. And so I'm going to show you kind of a motivating example, I suppose. This is actually, speaking of the compilers course, this is the example makefile that we have to start off with. And I want to explain this section here. Okay, so like Dr. Fekel has demonstrated, with make you have the ability to specify your dependencies for everything. And that's great, but Java projects tend to, if you program in Java, you know it's kind of the style of Java is be very verbose. Projects tend to have a lot of classes, a lot of dependencies pointing together. And with make, you actually need to specify that. So these lines here, this line is saying, you know, any class file, use the corresponding Java file to make that class file. But these lines down here are saying the actual order you need to do the compilation in so that you avoid errors. I'm lazy and I don't want to deal with that. So one nice thing about Maven is it figures stuff like this out for you. So you just give it a bunch of Java files, you don't specify dependencies, it figures it out. So that's kind of my baseline motivating example for why you might want to go this route. So Dr. Fekel and I were talking about this the other day, and Maven is in fact named after the Yiddish word, which I forget, what was the translation?
It means expert.
Expert. Yeah, so they got some kind of meaning out of that, but I thought that was interesting. So let's go ahead and start. Now, I hate when I'm reading tutorials and they give you a bunch of boilerplate, they don't explain what it is, and you know, you're trying to follow along and you're like, well, how much of this is actually necessary and how much is it just for the tutorial to work? So I'm going to go ground up, starting with the folder with nothing in it. We're going to run a Maven command. Now, I'll explain the command later, but for now, just go with me on it. So I'm going to make this project folder. Project. Everyone, probably should blow that up a little bit more. Everyone see this okay? Okay. So the command I'm going to use is Maven compile. So there's nothing in this folder, okay? So as you expect, there is a problem. All right, I'm going to show you the absolute bare minimum kind of boilerplate. You'll just have to take my word for it. It's pretty small, so I don't think it should surprise you too much. So while make uses makefile, that's the name of the default file, Maven's default file is pom.xml. It stands for Project Object Model, I think. And this is the absolute bare minimum. So it's an XML file, and you just declare a project, and you end the project, and there's one tag in that says the version of the model you're using. This is important for kind of compatibility. The model version doesn't change very often, but if it did and you wanted old POM files to still work, this is necessary. Okay, so we have this POM file here. I'm going to try this command again. We'll see if we get anywhere this time. Okay, so maybe compile. Okay, it's a different error. That's nice. If you observe this, we have essentially 3 problems. They're repeated down here. We're missing something called a group ID, an artifact ID, and a version. Now this is kind of the, any kind of artifact or package or anything like that in Maven is identified by a 3 tuple made up of these 3 components. So all 3 of them together is how you identify things. And because of the first letter of each of these, this is sometimes called a gav. So if you ever hear that, you know what that means. But essentially, let's make that, add that to our POM file. Okay, so we need a group ID. I'm going to use just my name, the this actually means is, it's like the organization, or however you want to associate the owner of the project. Typically, this is where you put like a domain name, like edu.uky, that sort of Java package format. Then artifact ID, that's saying, hopefully I spelled that right, yeah. That's saying within this group, how do you want to identify this particular thing you're making? You can have many projects. I'm going to call my example project. Why not? And then we need a version. And we'll just do 1.0. Okay. So let's try it again. Now this is the part where you may potentially be wetting your pants. Yeah, that's a pretty bare bones project for all this to be going on, right? Okay, so if you do that, don't freak out when you run this, okay? So I've intentionally made a new account on my system. The first time you run Maven, this is going to happen. Basically, Maven, the program itself, is actually built with a plugin architecture. So it calls out to all sorts of plugins. Some of them are core plugins. And the first time you run it, it has to actually go download all of those. So if I run it again, it's going to be faster. Okay, so, all right. Well, we have compilation succeeded. I'm not sure what we compiled, but there you go. So the next step is going to be to actually put a Java file in here. So there is a standard project structure Maven uses, and if you follow that structure, you don't have to tell it anything, it just knows. So that structure for Java files, regular Java files, is source main Java. This is the directory structure. Then followed by the package, and the way you do the package name, you take the name, you take out the dots, and you replace each one of those components as its own directory. So for instance, the package edu.uky would be folder edu, inside that folder uky, and inside that would be the files. So I'm just going to use this package sandbox. Okay, and then we have a package. I'm going to actually put a file in there now. Source main Java sandbox, call it main.java. So I need to write a little bit of code here. One, we're in the package sandbox. Then we're going to make a public class main, and we'll just do a print for the main function here. System.out.println hello. This is almost all the Java code for this presentation. Not a Java tutorial, Maven tutorial. Okay. All right, so great. We have a Java file. Let's compile it. Maven compile. Cool, build success. I like seeing that. Okay. Now, you'll notice there's something different this time. When I compiled with nothing happened, it seemed. There's actually a target folder now. So let's see what's in there. Okay, there's some classes. It's main.class. That's the class file for the Java file. And there's some other stuff that I don't know what it is, so I'm not going to talk about it. Okay, so if you actually want to run now, you can. We can do Java class path, target classes, and then the name, and cool. So, very easy. Okay, so what is our next step going to be? How about we want to make a jar? Now, in this particular case, there's only one class, so it's kind of redundant, but if you have a bunch of these, you probably would put them in a jar file. It's a Java package. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, there's a command for that, Maven package. I'll explain what these are doing, by the way, in a minute. So let's run that. Oh my god, it's got to download some more stuff. Great. I'll wait for that to finish. Oh, okay, cool. And you'll notice right here, it said in your target folder, there's a jar file now. Cool. Let's see what's in it. Okay. If you're familiar with jars, this meta env manifest thing, probably familiar with that. And then we have our actual class file in there. Okay. Now there's really no point in making a jar without running it, so let's do that. where I'm going to actually make an aside and start talking about something else, and we will get back to this. Okay, so let me jump over here to the web, and I'm going to show you a couple websites. So maven.org is actually a repository. Now you notice when I ran the command, it had to download a bunch of plugins. Where does it get that stuff from? Well, Maven has this concept of repositories, and there's this central repository, maven.org. You can have other ones. There's other places that host them. And you also have one on your local machine. So you'll notice the first time I ran the Maven command, it downloaded a bunch, then it didn't have to. Where does it store that stuff? So that's actually in your home directory in this .m2 folder, which gets created by Maven. And so within the repository there, that's all the packages that Maven downloaded as dependencies. So that can tend to get big, but this is basically your local repository. And as you work in Maven, you can actually take stuff that you write and install it to that local repository and use it in your other projects too. So it's a handy place. And then the other site that you're going to want to know is actually maven.apache.org. And this is where, after this talk, if you want to learn more, this is where you're going to go because it has all the documentation and anything you might want to know. Now, Maven has this concept of a life cycle. So there are 3 life cycles by default. They're called clean, default, and site. And essentially, it's just a structure to allow plugins to hook in. So, for instance, let's do a clean real quick. I'll show you this by example. If I do Maven clean, what that's doing is it's saying there's a life cycle called clean. I want you to call that life cycle and do whatever it says do. So what it's going to do is actually delete, well, it had to download the clean plugin first. And now it's going to delete the target folder, which it did right there. So it can get kind of verbose, but if you actually look through this Maven log, it's pretty descriptive about what it's doing, so don't be afraid of that. So yeah, as you notice, the target folder's gone down. Okay, so clean, you can specify the life cycle itself, and that will tell you, that will run everything in the life cycle. Now, a life cycle is made up of phases, and I'm actually going to show you, I have it open here somewhere. Phases, right here. Okay. So these are the 3 life cycles. So in the clean life cycle, it's made up of these 3 phases. They call them pre-clean, clean, post-clean. And the default life cycle, it has all these phases. Now these descriptions over here is kind of a general idea of what that phase is going to be doing. Okay. Now, what actually controls, for instance, you saw me do compile a second ago. So what actually happens when I type Maven compile? So these phases within a life cycle are actually in an order. And the way they present it on this website, it's this happens before this, which happens before that, etc. And what happens is when you specify, I didn't specify default, I didn't do Maven default, I did Maven compile. So I specified a phase. And what it's going to do is, within the default lifecycle, it's going to run in order everything up to and including the thing you specified. So what happened when I ran Maven compile was actually validated, initialized, generated sources, etc. Okay. So how do you actually know what's going to happen when you type one of these things, one of these commands? So within the POM file, you can specify a packaging type. By default, it's jar, which is typically the one you want. But down here, this is going to tell you, given the packaging type you've chosen, but again, this is all pluggable, so you can have third-party packaging types, etc. But these are the defaults. So for the jar packaging type, which is the default, this is what it's going to do. It's actually going to, within the process resources phase, it's going to bind this goal. So now I have to talk about what goals are. Okay, so a goal is actually the next step down from a phase, and the goal is something that a plugin implements. So for instance, this, compiler, compiler. What that actually means is, within the compiler plugin, run the compile go. And as far as what these actually do, you have to research, look it up. But I want to show you a couple ways of actually running these. So let me do Maven clean again. Oh, I wanted to show you one thing real quick. So So you notice if you have all these phases, but you'll notice when I ran Maven clean, for instance, that even though it specifies 3 things that can happen right here, it didn't look like all that actually happened. That looks pretty simple, right? Okay, so what's going on there? Well, these are the possible things, but what actually happens gets defined down here. So the clean life cycle, by default, all it's going to bind to when you type clean is it's just going to run clean out of the clean plugin. I know that's a lot of cleans. But here's something. So you'll see that's happening right there. Now, why doesn't it say clean colon clean? Well, there's 2 ways of specifying the plugin. There's a short way and a long way. Okay? And I actually want to show you the long way here. Let's go to the Maven repository and search Maven clean plugin. Okay. So here is the group ID. Here's the GAV. Group ID, artifact ID, and version number. Now it's picking some version number by default because I didn't specify. But let's try building this. Org Apache Maven plugins. Okay. Maven. org.apache.maven.plugins. Maven-clean-plugin. Let's use version 3.0.0. Actually, I'm going to use 2.5 because I don't want it to download stuff again. Okay, and that specifies the artifact, and now I'm going to run the clean goal within that. That did exactly the same thing, so which do you prefer typing? Okay, so now I want to show you compilation and packaging, what actually happens there, because that's what you're going to be doing most of the time. So within the default lifecycle of a jar, which is our default packaging type, it's going to take these phases and bind these actions to them. Okay, so let's consider the compile phase, for instance. When I type Maven compile, it's going to run all of these from top to bottom order, but because the jar packaging type only binds to process resources and compile with these actions, I only expect to actually see 2 things if I do Maven compile. So let me do that. Maven compile. Okay, I see Maven resources plugin calling the resources goal, and I see Maven compiler plugin calling the compiler goal. Is that consistent with what we expect? Resources, compiler, compile. Okay. So just to hit the point home, let's do the package one real quick. And we should expect to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different things happen. Let me clean first. Okay, Maven package. Okay, we have the resources plugin, that's 1. We have the compiler plugin, 2. We have resources again, 3. Compiler, 4. Surefire, 5. Jar, 6. So this is a definitive way of knowing what's going on within this POM file. Okay, now that I've made that aside and kind of explained briefly the life cycle, let's actually fix that jar file that we had. So we want to be able to actually execute that, right? So we're going to do that by modifying the Maven jar plugin. Okay, so let's open up the POM file, which I already have it open. Okay, so this XML structure you just have to look up, right? You're not going to remember this. Okay, so we have this build tag. Within that, we're going to do plugins. Within that, a specific plugin. Okay, so what plugin are we modifying? Well, the Maven compiler plugin, or sorry, the Maven jar plugin. So we need to specify its GAV. Okay, so group ID, org, Apache, Maven plugins. Okay, the artifact, that's Maven jar plugin. And the version. Now here's where you can pick. I actually want to go with the latest. I'm going to use 3.0.2. I know I was using a different one before. Okay, so that specifies the plugin, but that's not really going to change anything except if I gave it a different version, then we'll call that one it's still going to do what it was going to do before though. So we need to actually add some configuration changes to this. So configuration section, okay. We're going to mess with the archive that it generates. And within that, the manifest, gotta love XML. Okay, main class. This is where we actually specify what class has main in it. Okay, well that's sandbox.main. Okay, it's getting me worked up. All right, let's package. All caps.
You asked for a new one.
Indeed.
3.02.
You'd think I know better by now. All right, there we go. Hey, it even built the jar, in addition to all the other stuff. Okay, let's try running it now, fingers crossed. Thank you.
Now, is it automatically finding all of the prerequisites from the imports or whatever it might be?
Okay, perfect question. That's exactly what I was going to go to next. Okay, so let's say we actually want to extend this project. Well, I'm really running out of time. Okay, let's say we actually want to extend this project with a logging function. So there's a specific one I want to use, and I know what imports it has because I looked it up online. So, actually this one. Okay, so it's org.slf4j logger and logger factory. And I want to make one of those, so public static final logger log equals logger factory dot get logger. Got a little job. And then I'm going to log something. Log.info. This is a log message. That's what all my log messages look like, by the way. They just self-declare themselves. Okay, so let's package that. Fingers crossed. Oh my goodness. It does not know anything about that package. Okay, so that's a problem. All right, we hit our second stump here. Not that I'm counting. Okay, so this is where you go to the central repository and search SLF4J and see if Maven actually has that package somewhere. And through a long process of figuring out which one you want, which I just happen to know is SLF4J-API, and picking a version, you can actually get a dependency tag. Oh, how nice. So, we go to my POM file, I want to open up a dependencies section. I'm just making this up as I go, by the way, and it's somehow figuring out what I mean. There we go, goodness. And that one, and that one, okay.
You know about the equals shortcut?
I should use it more often. I learned what I needed to and then stopped. Yeah, I'm working on that one. Okay, so now I've specified it as a dependency. So if I do package now, it's downloading the dependency. Hey, it actually built it. So specifying the dependency for compilation was actually that easy, and it just figured it out from that. Now running it's a different story. If I actually go to run this, I'm going to get an error. And the reason is, while Maven knew where it was for compilation, now when you're running it, the runtime needs to know where it is. This is where you have to make a decision as the developer what you want to do. You can actually take the dependencies and stick them in your jar file, embed them, or you can let the client know that they need to have them and put them in their class path. That's kind of up to you. There's different ways to do that. And I'm unfortunately out of time. The last thing I was going to actually show was actually I can show it real quick because I have a backup of this project. Project backup. So, what I've done here I've actually called in the check style plugin, and check style does not get executed by default, but if you want to check your styles, this is a nice, easy way to do it. So I just specify that I want the plugin with its gab, and now I have to tell it, if I want it to automatically run, I have to tell it when, how to do that. So you do that with this executions thing, and you give it whatever name you want to give it. And I'm saying the phase prepare package is where I would like this to run. And now, and the goal is going to be check style. Now that's something the plugin specifies. It has a check style goal, and that's how you get the style guide out. This prepare package phase is telling it when to run. And actually, if I jump over here real quick, let's see, where's it at? File, prepare package right here. So that's a known default phase. So you can just take plugins that you want and stick them in here and hook them in wherever you want. And when you actually run Maven, which I'll do from this directory, it runs it. It knows what you want. And so after it finishes downloading a bunch of stuff again. Anyone know any good jokes while we're waiting?
So Scott walks into a bar. What is it? Should have died.
Okay. It actually showed the output there, but I'm going to run it again without all the jar stuff. Okay, so you can see it's actually check style is running now. I told it to run at that phase of the project, and it's given you a bunch of errors. So it's very picky, by the way. And it checks not only the style of your source files, but how you're building the jars and stuff like that too. So, well, I'm out of time, so I guess if you all have any questions, well, I guess we have a minute. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead.
How did you possibly get started?
Okay, yeah. My research group builds software for HP Van's SDN controller, and in order to do that, you have to know Maven, so I didn't really have a choice. But now that I have learned it, I'm happy, and essentially, you really just need to go to maven.apache.org, and right here, this section, configure use. If you go to use, read through this stuff. There's a 5-minute starter, and then there's a more detailed tutorial after that. And that kind of gets you a head start, and then from there you can learn specifics about whatever plugins you want and stuff like that.
When you do a compile, if you've only changed one file, does it only build a new class for that one file or make one?
Yeah, it's smart enough to have state. I kind of have a habit of doing clean before I compile anyway, so it doesn't benefit me much, but yes, it does.
Yeah, well, in the good old days, when compiling to